My name is Grace, and I'm a 35-year-old financial advisor. That's when I crossed paths with Jonathan, who would eventually become my ex-husband. I vividly recall our first meeting. He entered my office burdened with a hefty pile of documents and a look of concern. "Grace, right?" he greeted, extending his hand. "I'm Jonathan. I've been told you're the expert for financial dilemmas." With a smile, I responded, "That's what they say. Let's take a look and see how we can untangle yours." Jonathan was a tall man, his short brown hair complementing his warm, smiling eyes, which radiated friendliness even when his lips didn't. As we delved into his paperwork, our conversation veered from the dry world of numbers and taxes to our favorite movies, musical preferences, and even lively debates about the town's best pizza. Jonathan's relaxed demeanor made the time fly by, and before we knew it, he remarked, "I never imagined sorting out my finances could be this fun." Jokingly, I mentioned my magic touch, to which he laughed and suggested, "How about a coffee to thank you for making this experience far less dreadful than anticipated?" That coffee soon blossomed into dinners and then weekend trips away together. Within 7 months, Jonathan proposed, and I accepted without a second thought. It all felt like a whirlwind romance, but it was perfect for us. Our wedding was modest, yet enchanting. As we exchanged vows, I felt a profound sense of having found my lifelong partner. Jonathan's mother, Mary, was there too, her stern demeanor softening as she whispered about her eagerness for grandchildren. Initially, married life was idyllic. Jonathan pursued his career in real estate while I continued at my firm. We enjoyed cozy dinners, movie nights, and leisurely strolls. Yet the serenity began to fade when the subject of children emerged more frequently, particularly urged on by Mary. Her casual comments soon turned into a relentless campaign for grandchildren, phone calls to inquire about my pregnancy status, and remarks during visits about how a child would complete the family became routine. Although Jonathan tried to dismiss it with humor, saying, "Mom, give us some time," the pressure steadily mounted. At first, I strove to be patient, understanding her excitement about becoming a grandmother. However, her incessant interference began to take its toll. One evening, I confided in Jonathan, "Your mom needs to give us some space. It feels like she's a bigger part of our marriage than we are." Jonathan seemed uneasy, but dismissed my concerns, attributing it to her enthusiasm. Mary's influence increasingly encroached on our lives, extending beyond just her fixation on grandchildren. She had opinions on everything, how we managed our money, what we ate. One Saturday morning, while Jonathan and I were enjoying breakfast, his phone rang. It was Mary, and Jonathan, as usual, put her on speaker. "Jonathan, dear, are you both eating well? Remember, a healthy diet is essential for conception," she instructed authoritatively. Jonathan chuckled and reassured her, while I managed a strained smile, feeling overwhelmed by her pervasive presence in our lives. The situation was intensifying, and it felt as though she was monitoring our every move, adding layers of stress that I never anticipated in our marriage. When Mary's visits became more frequent, one evening she arrived unannounced, laden with a stack of parenting books. "Grace, you should start reading these. It's never too early to prepare," she declared as she placed the books heavily on the coffee table. I shot a glance at Jonathan, hoping he would intervene, but he only shrugged. "Thanks, Mary. We'll take a look," I replied, mustering a semblance of gratitude. Her visits soon turned into a regular pattern, almost as if she was keeping a close eye on us to ensure we were perfectly primed for parenthood. Each time she broached the subject of babies, Jonathan would simply nod and echo her sentiments. One night, after yet another of Mary's overbearing visits, I reached my breaking point. "Jonathan, we need to talk," I said, my voice laden with frustration. "What's up?" he asked, eyes still glued to the TV. "It's your mom. She's overwhelming us with this baby talk. We can hardly enjoy our time together without her interference," I expressed. Jonathan finally turned to face me. "She's just excited, Grace. She means well." "Excited or obsessed?" I retorted. It feels like she's the third wheel in our marriage. Jonathan sighed. She's my mom. What do you want me to do? Tell her to stop caring? It's not about caring, Jonathan. It's about respecting our space and our decisions. Can't you see that? Jonathan remained silent, his attention shifting back to the TV, signaling the end of our conversation but not the issue. If anything, things escalated. Mary's visits grew even more frequent and her advice became increasingly intrusive. You two should take a vacation. Just relax. It'll help with conception, she suggested one day. Another time, she offhandedly mentioned, maybe Grace should quit her job to reduce stress. It felt as though she was dictating our lives, with Jonathan passively allowing it. I began to feel like an outsider in my own marriage. The warmth and understanding that once connected Jonathan and me were fading, overshadowed by Mary's dominating presence. The relentless pressure about having a baby was straining us both, leading to more arguments and a noticeable evaporation of the romance that once filled our home. Yet, I clung to the hope that things would improve, that somehow we would find our way back to each other. But then, everything changed one evening. Jonathan came home unusually late, his demeanor more somber than I had ever seen. I was in the kitchen, hurriedly preparing dinner when I noticed his state. Jonathan, is everything okay? I asked, concerned. He collapsed into a kitchen chair, burying his face in his hands. We need to talk, Grace, he said, his voice heavy with gravity. A chill ran down my spine as I sat opposite him, my heart pounding with apprehension. It's about us trying to have a baby, he began, not meeting my eyes. Remember those tests we went for? He finally looked up, his eyes meeting mine, filled with an emotion I couldn't immediately place. A few weeks ago, Jonathan and I decided to undergo a fertility checkup, hoping it might ease Mary's relentless pressure. When Jonathan came home that evening, his expression was somber, and I knew the results were in. It's not you, Grace. It's me, he said, taking a deep breath. He explained that the doctor had diagnosed him with a low sperm count, making it unlikely for him to father a child. The news hit us hard, a mix of relief, sadness, and confusion swirling within me. What do you mean? I asked, reaching out to squeeze his hand, seeking to provide some solace. Jonathan's voice broke as he replied, I can't father a child, Grace. He withdrew his hand, a gesture that felt like a wall going up between us. I won't go through treatment. It's not something I'm prepared to face. I was stunned by his refusal. But why? If there's even a slight chance, shouldn't we try? I asked, my voice thick with emotion. It's my decision, Grace. I just can't, he replied firmly, his finality piercing the air. I couldn't wrap my head around his resistance. The Jonathan I knew was always resilient, willing to face challenges head on. Please don't let this drive a wedge between us. We can face this together, I pleaded. He stood, avoiding my gaze. I need some time alone to think, he said, and with those words he left the kitchen, leaving me in a whirlwind of unanswered questions and rising fears. His outright refusal to consider any options was baffling. Was his pride really standing in the way of our future together? The following days were tense. Jonathan barely spoke, and when he did, his words were clipped and cold. The growing distance felt like a chasm in the foundation of our marriage, widening with each silent meal and unshared night. Then, one evening, the fragile state of our union cracked open irreversibly. Jonathan returned home late again. I lay in bed, feigning sleep, when I heard him on the phone. Yes, Mom, I got the results. No, I don't want treatment. I'll figure something out, he whispered into the phone, a conversation he hadn't had with me. It felt like a betrayal, not just of our intimacy, but of our vows. Mary's influence was more invasive than I had ever realized, and as I lay there, tears streamed down my face, marking the silence of our room. Our home had become a shell of the warm, loving environment it once was. We were like two strangers, merely sharing the same space, the remnants of our love lost in the shadow of his mother's overbearing influence. Just when I thought our situation couldn't get any more strained, life threw me an unexpected curveball. I had been feeling unwell, attributing it to stress at first, but then I missed my period. Despite the recent news about Jonathan's condition, a part of me dared to hope. I bought a pregnancy test, and sitting in the bathroom waiting for the result was agonizing. Then, the indicator showed positive. I was pregnant. For a moment, I was in disbelief. After all the discussions about infertility, this seemed like a miraculous glimmer of hope amidst the ruins of our marriage. That evening, as Jonathan walked in, his usual late self, barely acknowledging my presence, I knew I had to tell him. Taking a deep breath, I approached him. "Jonathan, we need to talk," I said, my voice trembling with the weight of our future. He looked up, weary. "What is it now, Grace?" "I'm pregnant," I blurted out, the words hanging between us in a heavy silence. Then he let out a bitter, cynical laugh. "Pregnant? How? The doctor said I can't." "I don't know, but the test is positive. We're going to have a baby," I said, the tears starting to well up in my eyes. He stood up suddenly, anger flashing in his eyes. "This is some kind of joke, right? You're trying to trap me?" I was shocked. "Trap you? Jonathan, I'm telling you we're going to have a baby. Our baby." He paced the room, running his hands through his hair in frustration. "No, this can't be. You must have cheated. That's it, isn't it? You cheated on me." I felt as though I had been physically struck. "Cheated? How can you even say that? I've been nothing but faithful to you." He wasn't listening. Consumed by his rage and disbelief, he shouted, "Get out! I want you out of this house." "Jonathan, please, let's talk about this. We can go to the doctor and get a confirmation," I pleaded, but it was like talking to a wall. He stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. That night, I slept in the guest room, my mind swirling with emotions. The next day, Jonathan was gone before I woke up. His mother, Mary, showed up instead. The look on her face was a mix of anger and disgust. "You should be ashamed of yourself, Grace, trapping my son with another man's child," she spat. "I didn't cheat on Jonathan. This child is his." I defended myself firmly. She laughed coldly. "Do you take me for a fool? My son can't have children. You're just a gold digger trying to secure your future." I was stunned by her cruelty. "This is Jonathan's child. I've never been with anyone else." She moved closer, her voice venomous. "You have 2 weeks to pack your things and leave, and don't even think about asking for alimony or child support. You won't get a dime from us." Mary's ultimatum was the last straw. I knew I couldn't continue living in a house filled with resentment and false accusations. It was time to take control of my life, for my sake and for the baby's. First things first, I filed for divorce. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was necessary. Jonathan and his mother tried to make it difficult. They wanted a piece of everything I had, claiming it was their right, but I had a strong case. Everything I owned, all my savings and property were mine long before Jonathan entered my life. Their attempts to grab what wasn't theirs failed miserably. As for alimony, I didn't ask for a penny. I wanted no financial ties to Jonathan, no reason for him or his mother to interfere in my life again. I was determined to start anew, free from their toxicity. I found a modest apartment, not too fancy, but cozy enough to be a fresh start. Packing up my things from the house was bittersweet. Every photo and every piece of furniture had a memory attached to it, but I was ready to leave them behind. The day I moved out, Jonathan was conspicuously absent. Maybe he couldn't face me, or perhaps he just didn't care. Either way, it didn't matter. I left the keys on the counter and closed that chapter of my life. The first few nights in my new apartment were the hardest. The silence was overwhelming, and the reality of my situation often brought me to tears. But I found comfort in the little life growing within me. Every night, I talked to my unborn child, filling my small apartment with whispers of hope and love. Gradually, what had felt like a sanctuary started to feel like a true home. My daily routines brought comfort, and my connection with my unborn child strengthened with each passing day. One afternoon, as I sorted through some old boxes, I stumbled upon a photograph of Jonathan and me in better times. A pang of sadness briefly washed over me, but it quickly gave way to relief. That chapter of my life was firmly behind me. Just then, my phone rang. It was Jonathan. "Grace, I've received the divorce papers," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "I'm glad they reached you. Please handle the formalities," I replied, striving for calm. There was a pause before he added, "I won't bother you about the baby. You won't hear from me again." It was a cold farewell, but it brought closure. Hanging up, I realized that in my solitude, I had discovered a resilience I hadn't known I possessed. I was ready to face the future, not as Jonathan's estranged wife, but as a strong, independent woman and a devoted mother. On a quiet evening, as I sat reading a magazine, my 5-year-old son, Arthur, played with his toys on the floor. Our peace was interrupted by a knock at the door. Puzzled, I answered, finding a woman on my doorstep whose eyes reflected a familiar sorrow. "Hi, Grace, it's been a long time," she said hesitantly. It took me a moment, but then I recognized her as Pamela, a friend from my past life with Jonathan. "Pamela, yes, it has been. What brings you here?" I asked. She looked uncomfortable, glancing at Arthur, who was now peeking curiously from behind my legs. "I thought you should know about Jonathan," she said, her voice soft. Just hearing his name after all these years sent a shiver through me. "What about him?" I asked, maintaining a steady tone. Pamela sighed. "He's not doing well, Grace. After you left, things went downhill for him. He became an alcoholic, remarried a few years ago, and had another child. But the boy was born with disabilities, and Jonathan couldn't handle it. He left them, divorced his wife, and now he's refusing to pay child support. He's in legal trouble." The news struck me, but not in the way Pamela might have expected. I felt a profound sadness, not for Jonathan, but for his child and the woman he had left behind. "That's terrible," I said softly. Pamela nodded. "I thought you should know, given your past with him." I appreciated her concern, but knew I had to maintain boundaries. "Thank you for telling me, Pamela, but that part of my life is over. Jonathan made his choices, and they have nothing to do with me or my son." Pamela looked at Arthur, then back at me. "I understand, Grace. I just thought—" I offered a small, sad smile. "I appreciate it, Pamela, but my focus is on Arthur and our life now. What Jonathan does or doesn't do isn't my concern anymore." She nodded, seemingly understanding. "I hope you and Arthur are happy, Grace. You both deserve it." "Thank you. We are," I assured her, glancing at Arthur, now fully absorbed in his toys again. After Pamela left, I closed the door and leaned against it, taking a moment to breathe deeply. The past has a way of sneaking up on you, but I was determined to keep it at bay, ensuring our future remained bright and unaffected by the shadows of days gone by. But I was resolute in my determination not to let the shadows of the past darken the vibrant life I had carefully built for myself and my son. The park was alive that day, buzzing with the laughter of children and the distant barks of dogs at play. I watched Arthur, my heart swelling with pride as he dashed around energetically, his laughter mingling with the ambient sounds of joy. Suddenly, a familiar voice cut through the air, chilling my warm feelings. "Grace, is that you?" My heart sank as I turned around. It was Mary, my former mother-in-law, striding towards us with a fixated gaze on Arthur. "Mary," I greeted her coolly, "what are you doing here?" She ignored the frost in my voice, her eyes never straying from Arthur. "He's grown so much. He's your son, right?" "Yes, this is Arthur," I replied, subtly stepping between her and my son. Her eyes sparkled with an unsettling eagerness. "I was hoping to see him. After all, he's my grandson." A wave of irritation washed over me. "And why would you want to see him?" "Well, you know my other grandson," she began, her voice trailing off as her expression darkened. "He's not well. He's sick. It's just not the same. I want to be part of a healthy grandchild's life." Her words struck me harshly, a verbal slap. The disdain in her voice for her grandchild was shocking. "Mary," I said, my voice steel hard, "you have no right to be part of Arthur's life, not after everything that happened." "But Grace, that was all Jonathan's doing," she protested weakly. I shook my head dismissively. "You supported him. You turned against me when I was carrying your grandchild, and now you speak with such contempt about your other grandson just because he's sick. That's unforgivable." Mary's face hardened. "You can't keep me away from my grandson." "I can and I will," I declared firmly. "Arthur doesn't need someone in his life who values people based on their health. He will not be part of your twisted view of family." She looked like she wanted to argue further, but I cut her off. "This conversation is over. Stay away from us, Mary. Your presence is neither wanted nor welcomed." Taking Arthur's hand, I walked away, leaving Mary standing alone, her face a mix of anger and disbelief. As we walked, Arthur looked up at me, his innocent eyes brimming with questions. "Mommy, who was that lady?" "That was someone we used to know, sweetheart," I replied gently. "But she's not part of our lives anymore." Later, sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky with warm colors, I felt a profound sense of peace. Inside, Arthur's laughter echoed as he played, signaling that life had settled into a calm rhythm, the storms of the past now distant memories. "Mom, look what I made." Arthur's voice pulled me from my reverie as he rushed out, holding a drawing in his hands, a picture of the two of us smiling under a big, bright sun. "It's beautiful, Arthur," I said, pulling him into a hug. "You're quite the artist." He beamed with pride. "I want to put it on the fridge." "Let's do that," I smiled, following him inside. As we walked, I reflected on how far we'd come. There was a time. The weight of the past once seemed crushing, but now it felt more like a distant echo. Later that evening, after Arthur had drifted off to sleep, I sat quietly with a cup of tea, reflecting on the day's events. The phone's ring broke the silence, and I hesitated before answering. "Hello?" "Hey, Grace, it's Kayla. I just wanted to check in. How are you and Arthur doing?" "We're doing well, Kayla. Arthur's growing up so fast," I replied, a smile brightening my voice. "I heard about your run-in with Mary. Are you okay?" Her voice carried a blend of concern and warmth. I sighed. "Yes, it was unexpected, but I'm okay. It's just another reminder of the past." "I know it's tough, but you've come so far, Grace. You're strong, and you've built a wonderful life for you and Arthur," she said encouragingly. "Thanks, Kayla. It means a lot." Her words wrapped around me like a warm blanket. We talked for a while longer about everyday things, small, comforting snippets of life. This connection with my sister was a vital reminder of the support system I had, even when days seemed daunting. After hanging up, I walked to the living room where Arthur's drawing was displayed proudly on the fridge. Looking at it, I realized how much we both had grown. The pain and anger of the past had faded, making room for healing and new beginnings. I tiptoed to Arthur's room, watching him sleep peacefully. Leaning down, I kissed his forehead gently. "Good night, my little artist," I whispered softly. Back on the porch, I gazed at the stars emerging in the night sky. The echoes of the past were indeed fading, their hold on me loosening. In their place was hope, a quiet strength, and the unconditional love between a mother and her son. This new chapter was not just about moving on, but about thriving in the warmth of new beginnings and the comfort of enduring familial bonds.
"This house is absolutely stunning," exclaimed my sister-in-law as she inspected every corner. "You're really calculating, aren't you? That's why you decided to inherit this house," she added accusingly. After examining the house, Noelle made an unexpected remark. "You have great taste. We're going to inherit this house." "Hasn't the inheritance matter already been settled?" I countered, trying to understand what she meant. "There shouldn't be any objections. We've decided to trade our current home for this one," she insisted. Her determination was evident. It was clear that arguing with her was pointless, but the moment was approaching when she would find out what I was truly capable of. "I'm Remy. I'm 28 years old and unmarried. Currently, I'm taking care of my grandmother, who is ill, while living in her house with my mother. I have a married brother, Mark, but since he found it difficult to support our grandmother, I took on the role. Although my mother is also around, she's old and finds caregiving difficult, so I'm the primary caregiver for my grandmother. When we were little, our mother got divorced and worked hard to raise us. As a result, my brother and I were mainly raised by our grandmother. I can't abandon her after all she has done for us. Moreover, I am single and have a flexible schedule due to my ability to work from home. My brother's wife, Noelle, doesn't seem very interested in taking care of our family, so I was the most appropriate person to take on this role. Caregiving is challenging. I continue to do it daily as a way of showing gratitude to my beloved grandmother. My days with my grandmother are full of enjoyment, and I don't feel any hardship. However, recently I've been feeling stressed about something else. It's about the attitude of my brother's wife. Mark does recognize the support he received from our grandmother, and although he can't be involved in her actual care, he often visits us to check on things. But his wife's behavior and words during these visits irritate me. "Are you cleaning properly?" Noelle once asked, inspecting the room. "Look at this room. You haven't cleaned it, have you? Since you're relying on Grandma, make sure you do your part." My sister-in-law, to put it positively, is the type to speak her mind, but from my perspective, she's unpleasant and rude. She visits our house, criticizes me with such an attitude, and often makes sarcastic remarks. I've let a lot of things slide, but the phrase freeloader is hard to accept. "You're just living here for free," she once said with a smirk. "Don't you think you have it easy staying here?" Indeed, I am staying at my grandmother's house, but I earn my own living expenses. I receive no financial support from my brother, yet his wife accuses me of having an easy life at my grandmother's house. It's incomprehensible to be criticized by her, who doesn't understand the difficulty of working while managing the house and caregiving. I am legitimately working and supporting myself with my income. I haven't touched any of my grandmother's assets. Even when I explained these points to Noelle, she ignored my words and provoked me further. Even so, the reason you're caregiving is that you don't have to pay rent, right? Instead of relying on your parents, you're relying on your grandmother, aren't you? My sister-in-law said sarcastically. Stress was piling up from dealing with my brother's wife. However, I also feel tired every day and don't have the energy to deal with her. Knowing that whatever I say would be met with negative responses, I gradually began to ignore her sarcasm. Then she would say, "Oh, you're not talking back. Does your silence mean you agree?" Whether I respond to her or not, Noelle, who frequently picks on me, leaves me in disbelief. To be honest, I want to ask my brother not to bring her along, but she's cunning and behaves as such. She never says anything bad to me in front of Mark. The unpleasant words are always thrown at me when it's just her and me. Therefore, my brother, unaware of her true nature, always brings her to our grandmother's house. I did try to have a light conversation about it, but it ended with him defending her. "She wouldn't say such awful things, right? Are you bullying my wife? Nobody likes an annoying sister-in-law. She's making a special effort to get along with you. Try to be friendly," Mark said dismissively. He always took his wife's side. Talking to him only made things worse. Realizing that I couldn't rely on my brother, I decided it was best to have as little to do with Noelle as possible. While harboring such feelings, one day, my grandmother's condition suddenly worsened, and she needed to be hospitalized. Mark was busy with work and couldn't find time to visit the hospital. As a result, my mother and I ended up taking care of my grandmother. My mother's health wasn't good either due to overwork, so it was difficult for her to go to the hospital every day. Therefore, I was the one who went to the hospital daily, checking on and caring for my grandmother. After a month of such a life, my grandmother quietly passed away. It was sudden, but I was somewhat prepared, knowing her condition was serious. However, it was difficult for me to accept her death, having spent my childhood with her and being with her until her last moment. While devastated by this harsh reality, I informed my mother and brother of our grandmother's death. Then, unexpectedly, my sister-in-law came to see me. Mark was delayed due to work reasons, so his wife came to me first. Could it be that she was concerned about me in such a situation? I couldn't believe it given her past attitude, but I thought for a moment that she might have some humanity. While feeling grateful for her visit, I expressed my thanks, but her response was unexpected. "If you have time to grieve, hurry up and finish the funeral and inheritance procedures," she said coldly. "Unlike you, your brother's busy with work. Don't give us any extra trouble." Instead of a warm-hearted sentiment or comfort, she seemed to have come to urge the progression of the inheritance and funeral arrangements. Of course, this is the kind of person she is. I was surprised to find out again that my brother's wife was such a heartless and self-centered person. Despite my grief, she started to rush the funeral arrangements. I certainly appreciated the fact that Noelle came to help in place of my brother, but I wasn't in a position to be ordered around by her, especially when she has been keeping her distance from our family until now. Though I felt dissatisfaction in my heart, I continued to endure, not wanting to cause a conflict right after my grandmother's death. When Mark finally appeared, my sister-in-law quieted down for a while. However, as soon as she was out of his sight, her usual sarcasms toward me didn't stop. Amidst my desire to properly process my grandmother's passing, her behavior infuriated me. Additionally, she had a talent for making insensitive remarks. "Your grandmother lived too long. Did she end up using all her assets? After all that, how much inheritance will we get?" Noelle asked, even before the funeral was over. She was already worried about money. My patience couldn't withstand this. "Is that what you would be thinking right after someone's death? Please stop it." I finally raised my voice. She seemed a bit surprised too. Nevertheless, there's a difference between things that should be said and things that shouldn't. Normally, my sister-in-law would have retorted, but this time, she didn't respond and just left the scene. Later, perhaps realizing she had gone too far, she avoided interacting with me, and the funeral was completed peacefully. At that point, my mental state also began to stabilize. I hadn't completely overcome the shock, but I vowed in my heart that it was pointless to dwell on the past. I returned to the house where I had lived with my grandmother and began to sort through her belongings alone. While organizing what inheritance should be claimed and what needed to be dealt with, my brother and his wife visited. "I'll help to sort out her belongings," Mark offered. There were many items, so I was grateful for the help. However, Noelle, yet again, focused only on discussing assets and money. While sorting through our grandmother's belongings, it might be understandable to discuss inheritance. I didn't argue with her at that time, but even my brother seemed slightly puzzled by her attitude. As we continued to sort out her things and progressed with the inheritance procedures, it became clear that what our grandmother left behind was her house and some money. At that moment, my sister-in-law quickly said, "We'll take the money. This house isn't suitable as a place for us to live, so you should inherit the house and take care of it." Perhaps the house, clearly showing its age, didn't appear valuable in her eyes. I sensed from her attitude that choosing money was more beneficial to her. Mark seemed slightly perplexed by her argument, but ultimately chose money over the house. Understanding their intentions, I calmly decided to inherit the house. As the conversation wound down, my brother and his wife began preparing to leave. "Thanks for helping out," I said as I saw them off at the entrance. Just as they were leaving, Noelle leaned close and murmured with a smirk, "Too bad all you got was this old house. But hey, at least I walked away with the cash. Was looking after your grandmother even worth it?" With that, my sister-in-law turned and walked away, her words laced with disdain. Her contempt for me was unmistakable to the very end. That day, I made a silent vow. No matter what the future holds, I will never forgive her. In the following months, I continued to live with my mother in the same house. It felt quiet without my grandmother. On a particular day, my mother was away on a trip with her friends, which added to the stillness within the house. As dinner time approached and I was about to head to the kitchen, the doorbell rang. Who could it be? I wondered as I headed to the entrance, where I found my brother's wife standing alone. My brother was not there. She had come alone. "Good evening. Is something wrong?" I asked in surprise, opening the door to find her already stepping inside. "Hey, why did you keep it a secret? This house is amazing," Noelle exclaimed loudly, inspecting every corner of the room. "You're really calculating, aren't you? You knew this would happen. That's why you chose to inherit the house. Her words were always laced with criticism towards me. Perhaps she was surprised by the transformation of my grandmother's house. From that surprise, she directed her grievances at me. In truth, after my grandmother passed away, I earnestly renovated the house. Recently, more and more people have been customizing and renovating homes themselves. I was also interested in this trend and, though a beginner, decided to give it a try. Fortunately, a friend who worked in construction lived nearby. With his support, I was able to finish the house to my liking. This house was something my grandmother was proud of. When she was alive, she used to say with a smile, "Grandpa was particular, so the carpenter chose and used good quality wood for this house." My grandfather had a particular preference for wood, and his acquaintances at the construction company were highly praised for their skills. I respected my grandparents' wishes and went on to renovate the house. The renovated house looked like luxurious accommodation. While incorporating modern design, it maintained the presence of my grandparents. This house, which my grandmother cherished, also became a valuable place for me. After looking around the house, my sister-in-law made an unexpected remark. "You have great taste to renovate the house like this. We'll take this house as our inheritance." "Wasn't the inheritance issue already settled?" I asked, struggling to understand what she was saying. She then said assertively, "Listen, we've decided we'll exchange our current house for this house. This house will be my husband's inheritance. You agree, right?" She was pressuring me as usual. "There shouldn't be any objections because it's an exchange," she insisted. "We'll start moving immediately. Sort out your belongings and leave soon." My brother's wife repeatedly said to leave, as if she had gone mad. I reiterated the facts about the inheritance, but she seemed to intentionally ignore them. Her determination was clear. She wouldn't budge, no matter how much I tried to persuade her. She believed that not yielding would make her point. It was obvious that arguing with her was pointless. Deciding that further dialogue was impossible, I chose to temporarily retreat. "Understood. Then I'll leave this house," I conveyed to her, and started organizing my things. "You've got it now. Please don't waste any time," she demanded, a wave of relief crossing her face as she saw me cooperating. Her expression softened into a smile. Ignoring her smug expression, I pretended to collect my belongings and walked to the garden shed. From there, I took the tools used during the renovation and headed back inside, where Noelle was waiting. Seeing me holding the tools, she was momentarily surprised, but soon urged me to hurry. "You can move those tools later. Just clear the room for now," she continued. "I understand. I simply needed these to collect my personal belongings," I replied, and slammed the tools into the large living room wall. My sister-in-law looked shocked, unable to grasp what was happening. Ignoring her astonishment, I began removing the wall materials. At that moment, my sister-in-law screamed in shock, seeing me destroying the house. She attacked me in fear, raising her voice. "Wait, you! What are you planning? What are you trying to do?" she yelled, desperate to stop what I was doing. While holding her back with the tool, I explained, "All the materials for the house renovation were paid for by me. They are my belongings, so I will collect them all." "That's not what I meant. Stop the destruction." Noelle continued to scream but didn't come closer to me. Ignoring her cries, I continued to strip off the wall components. As I was about to start working on the floor with my tools raised, my brother appeared. I had called him immediately when I had left my sister-in-law alone to fetch the tools. "What's going on?" I could hear loud voices from all the way outside, he said as he entered the room. Seeing the state of the living room, he looked astonished. What happened to both of you?" Mark must have been greatly surprised to see the damaged room, me holding a tool, and his wife crying next to him. She quickly told him what had happened. "This person is dangerous," my sister-in-law yelled, pointing at me. It was natural for him to feel suspicious of me under these circumstances. However, his wife was the reason I behaved like this. "She suddenly came today and told me to leave the house," I calmly explained. "I didn't expect the house to be renovated, and I can't accept the fact that it was inherited in a secretive way," Noelle exclaimed indignantly. "That's unfair. Therefore she should leave and we should live here," she added. Hearing my words, she started making incomprehensible comments in front of my brother. Listening to her contradictory statements, Mark fully supported me. We agreed that my sister would inherit the house, and we would receive money as an inheritance, right? He asked. Isn't the handling of this house my sister's right? Cornered by his words, my sister-in-law felt isolated and became emotional. Why aren't you taking my side? She shouted. If you won't do that, then I will end our marriage. Indeed, there's no point in continuing a marriage with someone who doesn't accept their mistakes and refuses to apologize. My sister-in-law, trying to pull my brother to her side with the threat of divorce, was met with his agreement. She was at a loss for words. From then on, my brother took control. What if my sister claims that the following is unfair? What if we use the inherited money for investments, and the money we obtained increased? How would you respond if she accused us of being unfair? He asked her. There's no way I'd concede, my sister-in-law replied emotionally. We're the ones who invested it, and we haven't violated anything, she concluded. Receiving her reaction, my brother spoke softly as if to guide her. Do you really think so? But what you're arguing is the same thing. This residence is old, and my sister used her own funds to renovate it and increase its value. After inheriting it, she just changed it according to her own wishes. There's no issue. My brother then turned to me. I'm sorry, he said. Sitting next to him, he appealed to his wife. You should apologize to her. Perhaps you'll realize your mistake through this perspective, Mark demanded. With tears in her eyes, Noelle said, I'm sorry for causing such a commotion. Of course, there are many things I wanted to point out, but for now, I accepted her apology. I sincerely apologize, my brother added. After that, my brother left the house quietly with his calmed-down wife. Though it was somewhat forceful, I was able to protect the house I had shared with my grandmother. As I saw off my brother and his wife, I spoke to my grandmother in heaven. I got a bit too excited and damaged your beloved house, Grandma. I'll touch it up until it's beautiful again. So please forgive me, Grandma. I'll take good care of this house from now on. Thank you, my dear. It felt as if I received a reply from my grandmother. My grandmother's photo that was displayed in the house seemed to be smiling faintly. Eventually, my brother chose the path of divorce. It became clear that what I said about her past attitudes and words toward me was true, and it seemed he also judged it would be difficult to keep living together. She probably wouldn't change. My brother hinted with a smile that perhaps our grandmother had given him some advice. As for me, I rebuilt the damaged house with my own hands. The repair costs were claimed by my brother to take responsibility for his ex-wife's mistakes. Seeing the state of the house, a friend who works at a construction company teased, that was a bold move. Honestly, I had always planned to renovate the color of the living room walls someday. I was never completely satisfied with it, but despite the challenges, I'm now happy with the outcome. Moving forward, I hope to cherish the memories this house holds and create new ones to build upon those experiences.